Introducing an automobile that will change the way you think about two-seaters. Reatta by Buick, the premium American two-seater you can be comfortable with.
Back in 1988, Buick introduced a two-seat coupe called the Reatta as a cheaper grand touring alternative to Cadillac's Allante or the Mercedes-Benz 380 SL. It was unlike anything Buick had ever offered before and was even built in its own dedicated factory. Although its name comes from the Spanish word for lariat or lasso, with the idea that it would pull in new Buick buyers, it instead was a flop, and even adding a convertible and eliminating its quirky touchscreen dashboard didn't help, leading to its cancellation just 4 years later. This is the story of the Buick Reatta. This is my old car.
Drive the premium American two-seater. Reatta by Buick. Go ahead. You deserve it.
Although I've had several requests to do an episode on the Reatta, I must admit that a constant request from this one specific viewer has led me to finally feature it, so I hope you like it. While recording this episode, it has been a challenge for me to pronounce this car's name correctly, as for some reason I had always called it the Reatta back when it was new, even though I later realized it really should be pronounced
Reatta.
I also have had several requests to feature the Riviera after I did my Oldsmobile Aurora episode, since they were similar cars. So when I get around to my next Buick episode, there's a good chance it will be about the Riviera. As I noted in my Ford Bronco 2 episode last week, send in your votes for the worst or best family sedan that was in production anytime between 1980 and 2005 for an upcoming Top 10 episode. Remember to add the words worst family sedan or best family sedan with your vote. The Reatta is one of the few cars that spent much more time in its concept and design stages than actual production. The original designs date back to the early 1980s, as Buick was struggling to figure out its market strategy and core audience. Back then, Buick had its legendary Grand National, but it also sold inoffensive and somewhat boring classics like the Century and LeSabre.
But for people who don't feel the need to leave a blinding impression, LeSabre offers something better: inner beauty.
And rebadged economy cars like the Skyhawk.
Skyhawk, the first car to succeed at being both small and Buick at the same time.
The closest thing Buick had to a halo car was probably the Riviera.
The new Buick Riviera. It's a classic all over again.
As it tried to hold on to the dwindling personal luxury coupe market. But what Buick didn't have was a two-seater sports car. Adding a two-seater to their lineup meant Buick could not compete with two-seaters GM already had, such as the Chevy Corvette and Pontiac Fiero. So it had to provide features a typical Buick owner would prefer, such as a more refined, luxury-themed ride, decent trunk space, and a roomy interior. But to be a true import fighter against such legacy sports car marques as Mercedes-Benz and Jaguar, they settled on a convertible design with a removable hardtop. But once the GM execs saw their proposal, it was clearly far and above a typical Buick, especially in price point. Instead, they felt it made more sense for Cadillac, which in turn would lead to the development of the Allante. Having a Buick convertible wasn't entirely ruled out, but instead they settled on a two-seater coupe model, with the option to later expand the lineup to include a convertible, to make up for the loss of the Riviera convertible, which ended in 1985. Although the Reatta body would be unique to Buick, it shared GM's two-door E-body platform with the Buick Riviera, Oldsmobile Toronado, and Cadillac Eldorado. But the Reatta was 5 inches shorter than the 1988 Riviera, and surprisingly wasn't built in the same factory, despite the Reatta sharing a lot of interior parts with the Riviera. Instead, GM established the Reatta Craft Center in Lansing, Michigan, by repurposing an Oldsmobile foundry that was first built there in 1919. The Reatta Craft Center differed from traditional assembly lines, and instead had teams of workers at a series of stations that would assemble portions of the car by hand, and then robots would move the cars to the next station. The engines for the Reatta, however, were shipped into the Reatta Craft Center for installation, as the same engine was already in use in the Riviera and Toronado. This 3800 series V6 made 165 horsepower, which for a car as small as the Reatta, made for a 0 to 60 mile per hour time of around 9 seconds. Far from an impressive time today, but respectable for the late 80s. Inside, the Reatta's dashboard was identical to the Riviera, which made the Reatta not as exclusive as it could have been. The height of GM's electronic digital display fad was in full force here. For the Riviera, and now also the Reatta, the driver didn't just view electronic displays, they had to interact with them as well. Although having much of the car's controls accessed via a touchscreen is standard in almost all cars today, it was unheard of in the 80s, except for Buick, with a then quite large touchscreen in the center of the dashboard. This touchscreen controlled all the radio and climate settings, displayed the tachometer and other engine status gauges, included a trip computer, and provided maintenance reminders. Even the fan speed was displayed with an animated fan graphic that would spin fast or slow depending on the driver's selection. Since the LCD green screen resolution was so poor by today's standards, only a limited number of controls could be displayed at any one time, requiring physical buttons around the screen to switch to different modes. Drivers new to the car struggled to keep their eyes on the road while trying to interact with the touchscreen, something which likely infuriated the typical Buick owner, who wasn't comfortable with this futuristic technology. The Reatta exterior also had a feature that was the standard for cool cars in the 80s, pop-up headlamps. I loved pop-up headlamps back then, but I was about as far removed from the typical Buick buyer as anyone considering my age, and also since I could barely afford any car in 1988. This marked the first and last time that any Buick had pop-up headlamps. Other Buicks may have had hidden headlamps, such as the older Rivieras, and at the time the Skyhawk also offered it as an option, but their headlamps themselves didn't pop up like the Reattas did. Buick originally estimated that they could sell around 20,000 Reattas per year, but only managed around 4,700 for its first model year of 1988. 1989 fared better, at around 7,000 sold, but still far short of projections. This despite the Reatta's base price being about half of what the Cadillac Allante was selling for. Some of that loss in sales was attributed to the touchscreen display, which proved to be an ergonomic nightmare, as Buick simply tried to push the technology beyond its limits of the time. The Reatta was already not courting enough traditional Buick buyers because of its very untypical Buick design, and those that did buy it overwhelmingly grew to hate all the green screen graphics.
Hello, computer.
It was the same year, 1989, that Buick got its first domestic rival, the Chrysler TC by Maserati, although only domestic in the sense that Chrysler was an American company, as the TC was built in Italy. Buick managed to sell more than twice as many Reattas than Chrysler sold TCs that year, but that was likely due to the Reatta costing about $8,000 less. The fact that the TC was often mistaken, and still is today, to be a Chrysler LeBaron didn't help. Check out my episode on the TC by Maserati if you'd like to learn more. For 1990, along with an upgrade to the 3.8-liter V6, the Reatta got a redesigned dashboard that moved away from the typical 80s blocky design. But more importantly, it eliminated the touchscreen interface and replaced it with a standard GM stereo unit and optional CD player, and more conventional climate controls. Buick did the same in the 1990 Riviera, as its owners hated the touchscreen too, so the Reatta and Riviera continued to share the same dashboard. Behind the steering wheel, which itself now housed an airbag, the green screen graphics remain, but now designed to resemble analog gauges. I am sure more traditional Buick buyers would have preferred actual analog gauges, but I'm also not surprised that Buick tried to keep some of the digital look that younger buyers may have liked. 1990 was also the first year of the Reatta convertible, an option that to me at the time seemed long overdue, since I think two-seaters should always have a convertible option. But the convertible Reatta wasn't built that way at the Reatta Craft Center. Instead, the convertible was created from existing coupes by American Sunroof Corporation, or ASC. Although the design of the coupe provided the added rigidity needed for a convertible, and although the resulting look of the convertible top was well integrated into the overall design, it didn't carry forward much in terms of luxury. That's because all the steps to raise or lower the top was manual, including opening and closing the tonneau cover. Although overall sales for 1990 of around 8,500 was about 1,500 more than 1989, about 2,100 of those sales went to the convertible, so sales of the hardtop dropped. Sales continued sliding for 1991, where only 1,200 hardtops and only 300 convertibles were sold, leading to the Reatta's cancellation that year. In the end, around 21,700 models were sold over its 4-year run, despite Buick's hopes that they could sell that many in just the first year alone. With all the money spent on the Reatta Craft Center, GM made sure to not allow it to go to waste when Reatta production ended. Between 1995 and 2000, GM used this space to convert Cavaliers and Sunfires into convertibles, and the last 3 years of the Cadillac Eldorado were built there from 2000 to 2002. But there were also 2 higher profile models built in what had now become the Lansing Craft Center. From 1997 to 1999, it was the home of the GM EV1, GM's first fully electric production car.
The car of the future today.
Which, like the Reatta's touchscreen display, was simply too far ahead of its time, resulting in GM having to crush several hundred cars just so they wouldn't be liable to maintain them. The last car built at the Lansing Craft Center was the Chevy SSR, a retro-styled pickup / muscle car / convertible that, like the Reatta, only lasted 4 model years, and the Lansing Craft Center was demolished in 2008. Both the EV1 and the SSR are being considered for future Mile Car episodes. Because of the Reatta's history of being a unique and maybe a bit daring choice for Buick, there are probably more Reattas still around, at least in proportion to how many were built. than most other 30-plus-year-old cars. There's even a website to help Reatta owners connect and find parts. Sadly today, with Buick's demographics such that they can only find buyers for crossovers in the US, I think there's a better chance that we'll see any new car with pop-up headlamps before we see a new Buick two-seater. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.